This is TWiT.
The world is changing rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that it's hard to keep up. That's why Micah Sargent and I, Jason Howell, talk with the people making and breaking the tech news on Tech News Weekly every Thursday. They know these stories better than anyone, so why not get them to talk about it in their own words? Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and you won't miss a beat every Thursday at twit.tv.
Now it's time to talk about the real story of the week, the month, the year. Activision and Microsoft sitting in a tree. Kissing.
So there's kind of three things going on here. As everyone, I hope, knows, very early this year, I think in February, Microsoft announced it plans to buy Activision Blizzard for almost $70 billion, $69 billion.
That's a lot. That's more than Twitter. That's a lot of
billions.
Yeah.
Yep. And, of course, it has to go through the regulatory process. Microsoft was very open up front. They said, look, this is going to take a while. We don't expect to close this until the end of our next, now current fiscal year, which ends at the end of June in 2023. And they knew there would be feedback from the EU, the UK, South Korea, China, United States, other places, whatever. I've always kind of said that this is something that should sail through with the right compromises, and that Microsoft would make the right compromises to make it happen. What has happened since then is that one major competitor has emerged, and only one, to complain about this. Not everyone knows this. It's Sony, right? And Sony's
because they have the PlayStation. They're afraid they're going to lose the great big Activision titles, chiefly Call of Duty.
Yes, and a couple of things are interesting about that. We all focus on Call of Duty, I think mostly because Sony won't stop talking about it, but Microsoft keeps saying, yeah, Call of Duty. We would never take that off PlayStation. That doesn't make any sense. We're doing this for the mobile play, And in recent weeks, Phil Spencer, I was calling him Phil Spector this time. Anyway, Phil Spencer, kind of a music thing going on lately.
Yeah.
Phil Spector has ruined more things than Phil Schiller has. Anyway, Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, has come out publicly many, many times and said, look, we're never going to do this. It doesn't make any sense. Don't worry about it, And they've offered supposedly different deals to Sony, whatever. So Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, published an editorial in the Wall Street Journal this past week talking about the acquisition and the complaints they've heard and what they will do. There wasn't too much new to it. In fact, I was a little surprised how short it was. He's written very long posts in some cases. I thought this guy was just going to really lay it out and say, look, bing, bing, bang, economic advantage, blah, 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 whatever. But really his editorial was about two different topics. One was Sony and the other was mobile. And on the mobile front, he actually didn't have a lot to say beyond saying, look, in the video game world, he didn't say distant number 3, but we have been we have been in the third place basically forever. And we are in third place now. We don't ever expect to not be in third place. We're just not a dominant force in consoles. However, the way the gaming industry is going is most of the action now is taking place on mobile. In fact, by the way, even Activision Blizzard is seen as not just because they have a lot of mobile games, but because one of their most lucrative franchises, Call of Duty, actually makes more money on mobile than it does on PC and console, which is crazy. It's kind of a brand new game.
It's not even the same game on mobile, right? It's
not. Well,
they had a zombies thing. Oh, really?
It's multiplayer. Yeah, you can play multiplayer. It's actually pretty damn good, I have to say.
You wouldn't play it on a phone.
I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be able to see it, but I played it on an iPad with an Xbox controller.
Okay,
I'm going to tell you, it's not horrible.
Yeah.
But that's whatever. That's neither here nor there.
It's popular.
Yeah. The complaint that he had, which is the complaint that all developers have basically, and what Microsoft has said in the past, is that we have these two gatekeepers in mobile, Apple and Google, and both of them charge inordinate fees and impose crazy restrictions on developers when it comes to dodging in-app payments, which is where Apple makes all their money. When you look at Apple's services business, which is their second biggest business, most of that comes from the App Store, of course. They charge 30%, which 30% is as arbitrary a number as 10,000 steps, 1,000 hours to become an expert, 8 glasses of water a day, all these things that we have in our heads that are just the way they are. None of those mean anything. They're all nonsense.
Well, but Microsoft charges 30%. So does Sony, don't they?
Oh, on Xbox, yes.
Yes.
But we can explain that because
But they did it first. So Apple, I think, was following along with what they thought was industry standard practice.
I doubt that, but I don't. Okay, let's just say that's what it is. Who cares? That's fine. The problem when you have a market that is some size, you can do whatever you want, right? But at some point, you become a monopoly, or in this case, a duopoly, and you have to follow slightly different rules. The things that were okay for you as a scrappy startup are no longer okay because now you're a dominant market power. Apple keeps talking about the billions of users they have. They are one of only 2 mobile platforms. There's a weird. This is mostly on Google's part, I will say, but there is a weird, almost Japanese style of non-competition between these two companies where their mobile app stores have exactly the same terms everywhere. That has to be on purpose. That's on Google's part. But
wait a minute. But so does Sony and so does Xbox.
Yes. Sony. Okay,
So is Microsoft
here's the difference.
Following Apple or Apple following Microsoft or Google following?
I don't know that.
Everybody agrees it's 30%. That's the standard.
Nobody actually. I don't know that who. Okay, so 2 things. We're only talking about 4 or 5 companies here. So Sony.
But
Apple,
you can't say it's Apple, Google. It is a broad range of stores.
No, it's not. Hold on. I can say that because Microsoft, Sony have markets that are number in the tens of millions. Apple and Google have markets that number in the billions. Those are order of magnitude differences. Apple and
How
Google.
about Steam? Would you include Steam in that list? Steam also charges 30%.
Also a tiny market compared to Apple and Google. They have to play by different rules. That is literally the law. They are not beholden to the same set of rules. If you don't have a monopoly, you can do whatever you want with it. But yes, they do. Of course they do.
Apple has a monopoly among people who use iPhones, but iPhones isn't even more than half the market.
But it is 1.5 billion people.
Yeah,
just by itself.
In a world with 8 billion people.
But in a world of 3 or 4 million phone users, that's a duopoly, is what it is. There is no competition in this market, and when the only 2 people who control this market, companies control this market, set prices arbitrarily with no relation to the cost of doing business, and are able to prevent companies like Microsoft from coming out with an app that will let them run cloud gaming, streaming games, because what Apple wants to do is charge a 30% fee on every game that anyone plays through that platform, whether it impacts their infrastructure or not, and use their in-app payments, because there are no other choices, basically, unless you're Spotify. That's starting to change. Only on Google. No, that's, I don't remember. Is that Apple or Google? I think it's only on Google. It's only on Google. And that's what makes these things different. Apple sells in some years more phones in 1 quarter than Sony or Microsoft sell consoles in one entire generation over 7 to 10 years.
No, that's right. Yep.
This is a completely different kind of market. It's and the other thing is I haven't published this yet, but I've been writing this thing about what Microsoft used to call the next wave. And when you look at personal computing, I think it's fair to say we've only had 2 major eras of personal computing. There was the PC, the personal computer era, which was mostly Windows, but also Mac and I know what Linux. And in the early days, we had, Commodore, Atari, TI, whatever. And then we've had the mobile phone era, which started with the iPhone, the modern smartphone era, right? These things are, the thing is, when Microsoft controlled the world, if you go back in time 20 years, 25 years, whatever, we were talking about hundreds of millions of computers. And Microsoft, to a lot of people, was the most evil company on earth. But one of the things they didn't do was prevent developers from releasing apps on their platform, right? Unless they followed some crazy arbitrary rules. Apple and Google control markets that are in the billions of users. This is a much bigger thing than the first era of personal computing. They are the gatekeepers. And this is, this has been a problem for a long time. So the argument from Microsoft, I'll just use the Microsoft example because they've been very public about this. They wanted to put Xbox cloud gaming on Android and iOS. Google said yes, and Apple said no. And Microsoft said why? And they said, well, you have all these games in here. We need to make money on every single one of those things. And they're like, this has nothing to do with
that's
you.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
But this is the argument. So, Mr. Smith, sorry to get back to the his public argument in the Wall Street Journal, he basically laid out 2 points. He said, look, this acquisition will be good for the industry. It will help solve 2 problems. One of the problems is mobile, and one of the problems is Sony. Which is kind of an interesting way to put it. But he in no way explained how them acquiring Activision Blizzard would solve the mobile problem. All he basically was arguing was that once they have this stuff, they'll have more content, and I guess they'll have more leverage or something. Apple is never going to make any changes for them. Apple, and to a lesser extent Google, will need to be prodded by antitrust to make changes. And I think the reason they're digging their heels in so egregiously, especially Apple, which is insane in some ways, is because they know that by doing this now, they'll get the best deal they can get in the future. In other words, we don't know what the number is, but let's say Apple could run their App Store infrastructure with a 5% fee and still be wildly profitable. They don't want 5%. They want 15%, or they want something in the middle, and that's probably where this is headed. This is kind of a secondary issue.
Who would figure that out, though, and how would they figure that out? Like, what is Apple's cost of business?
Yeah,
right?
Internally, they know what they know what it is.
Of course, they know
what it is.
Yeah.
So you know how every time there are quarterly results from Microsoft primarily, right? But I also cover other companies. We write about this, and we look at the data that they provide, and you can see the giant holes in the data that they don't provide.
Yeah, they don't want to give you the deets. Yeah.
One of the things that Apple used to do, which I really liked, I thought it was very transparent, was they would actually provide literal numbers of units sold of their top platform. So we sold this many iPhones, we sold this many iPads, this many Macs, whatever those things were. Over time, because eventually the hypergrowth has to stop, they stopped doing that. And, legally they can, but it becomes less transparent. One of the bits of data they've never shared and won't share, because this, I think, and many people think, including a guy that used to run that business for Apple, who's actually spoken, publicly about it since he left the company, is that this thing is stupid successful because these fees have nothing to do with how much it costs them to run the business. But like I said, it's kind of a secondary issue, because the real issue here is it doesn't matter how much it costs to run that business. They want to charge developers for things that have nothing to do with the infrastructure that they are paying for. And Microsoft would like there to be Microsoft would like to do what Epic would like to do, like I'm sure many others would like to do, which is not just have a choice of in-app payment systems where they could, have competition, get the lowest possible fees, but also have it be open like it is on PC and Mac, where you can have multiple stores or just an open system on the web. And we all know the arguments against it. We all know the arguments for it. But I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot. I think ultimately open wins the day. And Apple is the exact opposite of open, especially when it comes to this part of their business. Okay.
I'm going to channel Alex Lindsay here, because he's the stalwart defender of this whole thing.
Okay, good.
And has a little bit more expertise in this arena, because he's had apps on the App Store. He's submitted apps. He's put apps up there. And he says, as a developer of apps, the convenience of the App Store makes it well worth it. Remember, Ingram used to charge a lot more to distribute a box of Microsoft Office. They'd take half or more.
That's not what we're comparing it to. We have the web now.
Okay, so we have the web now, but you still have to create a website. You'd have to pay for bandwidth. And there's the discoverability of the App Store, which is a value.
There's no such thing as discoverability in the App Store. There's 80 billion apps in there. There's no discoverability.
Well,
the chance that you release an app and no one ever sees it is 99%. I just say this.
But users on the iPhone they're gonna search the App Store if they hear about something.
And that would be fantastic if that was one option. Actually, I got to tell you, I almost don't care if there is. No, if it was one of some options.
Like there are other app stores. I think Apple makes a pretty credible case that other app stores are not a desirable thing. I mean, they're on Android. It doesn't change the equation.
We're arguing something that has nothing to do with this topic. So let me just say this. Alex, as a developer, as an individual, and the fact that Apple has services that are important to him makes sense. He is part of what is 99% of the developers on there, but also part of from a revenue perspective, of the 1%. So the companies that want change are companies that want to, and by the way, one thing that would benefit him would be a choice of payment systems where they could compete on price, and he could pay a lower fee to get the exact same service in the exact same store.
Well,
that would be
to do that fairly. You'd have to have a separate store because Apple's paying the bandwidth and storing the app, and signing the app and all this security stuff. So if you're going to do that fairly, you have to open other app stores, not just say other payment systems.
Google is test marketing this system right now with Spotify and several other companies. And
well, there is an argument for companies like Netflix and Spotify that there's really no reason for Apple to take 30%, and they'd only take 15%, by the way, not 30.
Okay. That's actually not my second point. My second point was he is not representative. So. We're not talking about Alex Lindsay, personal developer. I've made apps. Look, I put something in the store. I'm talking about Microsoft, the biggest software company on earth.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Epic Games. I'm talking about big software companies. They don't need these things that Apple provides. And it's not worth 30% of the money that you make. That's crazy.
Well, that's true.
They know how much this thing costs.
That's true. Although
they know how much it costs.
Apple does give those people a break. It's 15%.
But it's still...
It should be zero? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not.
Should Microsoft be told how much they can take in the Xbox store, and Sony and Steam be told how much they should take?
Yeah,
I know there's smaller markets, but should some regulator come in and say, no, you don't get 30%. You get 15.
Leo, listen. If you owned a car and you could only buy gas at one gas station on Earth, you'd have to pay the price that they asked because that was the only gas station. But if there were different gas stations and they all competed, the prices would naturally be lower. There's just no choice. The point is they are keeping prices artificially high, which is price fixing, and preventing companies like Microsoft with cloud gaming from conducting business and interacting with their own customers.
No, I think the argument for Microsoft makes sense, but there are vast number of small developers who use the App Store and would have no other good way of doing this.
No one's saying take away the App Store.
And they're very happy. No, they're very happy to pay 30% because of the benefit they get. It's the Microsoft, Spotify's, and Netflix of the world that don't want to pay 30%. Let's be clear. And it's Spotify that's given this App Store hard time in EU. It's all coming from Spotify.
That's not
I don't have any sympathy for that. That's just some big company saying, I don't want you to take it.
But it's not correct. If every developer on Earth, Alex Lindsay all the way up to Microsoft, would still benefit from lower fees if those fees were still fair to Apple. The point of the 30% complaint is that is inordinately expensive. It has nothing to do with the reality of running that store. It is anywhere from 3 to 10 times too expensive.
I don't know how we know that.
Because there are other companies that do this kind of thing. And by the way, Apple benefits from scale. That they get a better deal from MasterCard and Visa and American Express because of the volume of traffic that they do. They are, as a bigger company, but actually their costs are lower as a percentage, higher, I guess, overall. But because there's so much interest in that store. It's a virtuous cycle. And look, the only way we can truly know it is for court cases like what's happening with Epic and maybe with other companies in the future, where this stuff will have to come out. And they can say, well, how profitable is this?
The position, though, is we're big, rich companies, and we don't want Apple to make as much money.
No,
and I don't think that's fair. And if Microsoft were in the same position with a majority share of the market, and they locked it in, wouldn't they be doing the same defense?
This is not their complaint at all. I just brought this up as part of the big, broader complaint about the App Store.
Brad Smith was complaining.
Brad Smith was complaining that as gatekeepers to mobile, they're actually preventing them from getting their games out to mobile users.
Right.
They've
because
had to bypass the App Store
issue. Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't. I just mentioned that because this is part of a bigger story. He didn't bring this up, so I don't. We can, like I said, we can debate that, but that's not the.
His issue was that they wouldn't let Microsoft do a store. Is that what he was? I didn't read that.
It's not a store. It's not a store. They wouldn't let them release an app called Xbox Cloud Gaming that would allow people to access the library of games that are available on Microsoft's data centers, by the way, not Apple's, and stream them to these devices that in no way would impact Apple's infrastructure. Because what Apple wants to do is take a 30 or 15, whatever the number is, % cut of each one of those games, of whatever value they think they might have. They don't want, so Microsoft says, well, hold on a second. Netflix is on there doing this with movies. YouTube Music is on there doing this with music. How are games different? Do you know how games are different? Apple would never say this because games make up, I don't remember numbers off the top of my head, 80-something%, I believe is the figure of the profits and revenues that app stores generate. That's when, I talked about like the 1%, 99%. When you come at like for the content type, most of the stuff in the app store is, I don't know what the breakdown is, but most of the profits and revenues are games. If it wasn't for games, the app store would, it wouldn't be a non-event, but it'd be a much smaller entity. So they look at this thing differently because it's games, because games are so lucrative for Apple. Not the games they make, although they have their own service, but games that others sell on their service because they get that cut.
So what do you think Microsoft would like? I mean, if they could make the rules, would like Apple to do? Just say, hey, go ahead, put your game store in here.
No, it's not a game store.
I know, but it's, okay, xCloud in there,
look,
and we won't charge you anything, even though you're charging money for the use of it.
Let's say what Apple would like to do is this. You have an Xbox, an Xbox Cloud Gaming app. Fine. If you subscribe to the service through this app, which is Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, we get a 15% cut every month of the $15 a month that you are charging your own customer.
Right.
So Microsoft's losing that amount because someone decided to sign up to the app. Okay, fine. Microsoft's response to that could be like, well, we're not going to lose signups in the app, which Apple would say, well, that's fine, but you can't even tell people you can sign up because that's one of the things that, Apple does. They're terrible, but whatever.
Right.
But I think they would like to change that. That's one thing, right? Now, as far as the actual amount of the fee, I don't know. And I don't think anyone really knows for sure, but it's somewhere between 3% and 30% is the right number. And based on the way credit card companies and others with financial infrastructures work, it's a lot closer to 3% than it is to 30. But let's split the difference. Say it's, what is that difference? 15, 18%, whatever it is. It does. I don't even care. That's not really the point. I just brought that up because that's a point with the App Store. But the other issue is, Microsoft has this thing. There are examples of these things, but they're different types of media. Apple is not charging YouTube Music or Spotify some 30 or 15% per song streamed because it has this value, blah, blah. They don't do that with those things. They only want to do it with games. It's not a store. You don't buy things in it. Nothing's getting transacted. Apple's total cost for their customer using this app is that they downloaded it from their server, which I'm not saying it doesn't cost anything, but whatever. They download.
Well, they have credit card fees, and they have 4% credit card fees or something like that, right? And then they have they have to provide server space and
that's fine.
Would it be 8%, 10%? That would be fair, and I just don't know who would figure that out. I mean, what are
they charging? If you have Spotify,
15,
and you pay you paid for it yourself. You went to the web and you downloaded the app from Apple. What is Apple getting for that app? Nothing. They're getting zero. So for some reason, it's okay with Spotify. Which, by the way, what's their number? 500 million people use or some crazy thing.
No, I think Apple gets 15% from Spotify.
They can't get. There's no. I'm not talking about subscriptions.
If you just have the app and you pay on Spotify.
Put an app.
Yeah.
They get zero.
Yeah.
So that app costs Apple more than Microsoft will ever cost them because the Xbox cloud streaming app will only be used at most by single-digit, maybe double-digit millions of people. That's it forever.
Right.
It's never going to cost them a cent. But they look at it and they think we can squeeze money out of this thing. And Microsoft's like, we don't charge per game. It doesn't make sense. Like, what Apple wanted Microsoft to do was put a separate app into the store for every game that they offered through Game Pass.
That was crazy.
And it's like, guys,
nobody was going to do that. And Epic had the same problem. But I have to point out, Epic brought suit and lost over all this.
That's still in court. So we'll see.
Well, they've appealed, but they have lost, and there's very little likelihood of the appeal succeeding.
We'll see.